What were you afraid of when you were kids? My fears were not unlike those of any ordinary child. Darkness, monsters, ghosts, all those things we don't understand and think will hurt us. I have to say that these fears were taken away from me at an early age, to be replaced by something much more sinister. That day that changed my fear, I was visited by the most tetric, cruel, and real being that can exist. The human being. I will tell you about that night. I was only 12 years old, too young to be able to defend myself, but too old to need a babysitter. I was going to be alone for a short time since my parents had gone to buy a few things from the supermarket. I was in my room, playing with my toys on the floor. Suddenly, I heard a strange noise coming from the living room. I stood up, annoyed. I honestly thought it was my parents. Surely they have forgotten something. I was grounded that day, so I wasn't supposed to play with my toys, and now I was sure to be discovered. I started to put away all my toys as fast as I could, hoping to hide everything in time. But if they had come back to check that I hadn't done anything, they would surely discover me. Time went by, and my parents didn't come into my room, which seemed very strange to me. They always came into my room as soon as they arrived, since they had recently decided that I no longer needed a babysitter, but they were still a little paranoid. As time went by, I kept hearing footsteps, and at that moment I realized one thing. It was only one person walking. I quickly looked out my bedroom window and noticed something that gave me goosebumps. My parents' car was gone. My parents hadn't come home yet. I looked through the half-open door of my room and saw a dark figure moving. If my parents had arrived, they would have turned on the light. That person wasn't either of my parents. It was someone else. I stood still, trying to understand what I was seeing. The figure was moving slowly through the living room. He was not wearing a mask or anything to hide his face. It was a man, tall and thin, with a smile that chilled my blood. I did not know this man. I knew he was possibly a thief, but something about him made me even more uneasy. At that time, I was too young to understand what bothered me so much about that person, but now I understand. What I was too young to notice at the time was the man's behavior. He wasn't nervous, he wasn't in a hurry, and he definitely wasn't afraid. He was having fun. To make it even worse, at the time I also didn't realize that the man wasn't really stealing anything. He wasn't inspecting the drawers, he didn't have a bag or a backpack, and he didn't intend to run away as soon as he saw someone. That man was not looking for something, he was looking for someone. As I told you, at that moment I was too young to make the right decisions in the face of something like that. I was paralyzed, my hands were sweating, and I felt a strong stitch in my chest that did not let me breathe. At that moment I should have hidden, run, screamed for help. Whatever I could have done was better than what he did. Faced with that strange figure wandering around my house, I just stood there, staring at him as if I were totally exposed. The man saw me, and his smile widened. I ran back to my room, closed the door, and hid under my bed. I heard his footsteps approaching, slow but sure. The door to my room opened slowly. I tried to hold my breath, but my heart was pounding so hard I was sure it could be heard throughout the house. Once the man entered my room, I became much more nervous and almost gave a little scream. I was surprised that the man had entered my room as if my unlocked door had put up any kind of impediment for him to do so. Once he entered the room, I could watch from under my bed as the door slowly closed. He didn't need to close it that slowly, but he was doing it so that I heard the door creak and became even more desperate. A few seconds after the door closed, the light went out as well. The light was still coming through my bedroom window, so he went over to close it. We were both in absolute darkness. I could no longer see anything, and I was sure he couldn't either, which I considered an advantage. Now that I am an adult, I realized that this was part of his game. He enjoyed both of us not seeing anything. He had the situation under control because even if I escaped through the door, he would hear me do it and jump at me before I got away. In the best-case scenario, I could run a few meters down the hallway, and he would catch me there. This really was a no-win situation. From 1 second to the next, I felt a weight on top of the bed. At first, I thought the man had laid down, but I quickly realized that the weight was concentrated on just one part of the bed. The man was standing on top of it. My panic at that moment was overshadowed by my difficulty breathing. The bed was somewhat old, and when he climbed on top, I was crushed to the floor. I couldn't resist my urge to cry, so I cried softly. I thought he didn't hear me, but today I realized that with the silence, it was impossible not to. He knew perfectly well where I was. Suddenly, the bed became lighter and I could breathe. I was relieved. I began to breathe deeper and relax. Almost for a second, I forgot about the psychopath in my room. But that relief didn't last long. At that instant, laughter was sounding from under the bed with me. The man lying on the floor next to me. I froze, and without holding back, I began to cry. Next to me, the man pretended to be crying, mocking me. I couldn't see him as I had my back to him, but I felt his warmth next to me. Then, I began to feel something walking around my waist. It was one of my toy soldiers. The soldier was poking me with his plastic gun. Even though it wasn't sharp, the pressure caused me pain. It started to hurt more and more and more as I cried nonstop, and the psycho's laughter rang throughout the room, until suddenly there came a thread of hope. I heard my parents' car pulling up to the house. I used that moment to react, and I shot out from under the bed, escaping from my room. I ran crying, desperate, without looking back. The man could have caught me if he wanted to, but I never heard his footsteps behind me. He never tried to catch me. I got to my parents as soon as they opened the door and told them everything that happened. They quickly went to my room, but there was no one there, just a dark room and an open window. After reporting everything to the police, we moved a few months later. My parents couldn't bear the thought of the man coming back one day. Do you know what helped them make their decision? A few days after it all happened, a note appeared under my window. The note was addressed to me and said that if my parents hadn't come that day, he would still be playing with me.